All right. So with that, let's jump right to the Roto World player news because now it's panic city already because Christian McCaffrey will miss the preseason with the calf strain. Obviously, unlikely for him to even play in an actual preseason game. But from Kyle Shanahan, he said he might miss a couple weeks. There's no indications yet he's in danger of missing week 1. But for a guy that's the 101 quite often, Matthew, this just doesn't make you feel good.
Well, especially given his injury history. Obviously,
Right.
he's been great the last couple of years, but there were 2 years there during his dominant run as the fantasy 101 where he just missed majority of the season. And so I think there are still fantasy managers there that are a little gun shy based on that. Also, keep in mind that, he's coming off a season where he had well over 300 touches, where he was just, he had a massive workload. The 49ers went to the Super Bowl. I think you could make an argument that if Kittle and Debo don't get hurt in that game, maybe they win that game. I mean, they lost it in overtime, right? And so they're sitting here thinking about not an 18-week season. They're thinking about like a 22, 23-week season if you're Kyle Shanahan. So they're trying to pace their players out. So you could certainly see like a reduced workload, which ultimately is fine, by the way. If you guarantee me 17 touches from Christian McCaffrey and the Niners every week, I will sign up for that, right? Like, I'm not worried about the reduced workload, but I think there's certainly some concern. Having said that, I'm not moving him off my 101 just yet. I am, though, however, keeping an eye on it. Soft tissue injuries with running backs, especially ones named Christian McCaffrey.
He's had them before.
He's had them before, makes me a little nervous. I think the bigger question here, Jay, for me, is sort of like if you want insurance on McCaffrey, if you use the 101 or a top 5 pick, because he's not getting outside the top 5, even if somebody in your league is like, too many bad vibes for me, and I'm going to go with Tirico or CD or whatever, or Breece Hall, whoever somebody might go with. There's no way McCaffrey's getting outside the top 5 in any real league. So if you do draft Chris McCaffrey with a top 5 pick, are you drafting an insurance back? And then who is it? Because you've got Elijah Mitchell there, the rookie
Isaac Guerendo.
Guerendo. Thank you, Connor. Thank God that you're here for this. I
gotta help out somehow.
Thank you, Guerendo, and my guy Jordan Mason. I actually love Jordan Mason. I thought he was impressive last year when he got a shot. Jay, like, are you drafting all of them? Or are you just drafting one with a dart throw and trying to hope? Where do you see that playing out?
Doesn't it feel like everyone will, over the next couple of weeks, debate between themselves about Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason, and then Matt Breida is just the guy? It just seems like Matt Breida is always destined to fill that role. I think just with the way that Kyle Shanahan has talked about the situation in the past month or so, he doesn't seem particularly enamored of Elijah Mitchell and just the injuries that Elijah Mitchell has dealt with. And just subjectively, for me, I just prefer Jordan Mason and his upside and the idea that he could step into that role if McCaffrey isn't good to go. But I mean, ultimately, they are dart throws, either of those guys, or if you're going with Isaac Guerendo. But with McCaffrey, to me, the most interesting thing is that he had this same injury in week 17 last year against the Commanders. Then he missed time. He was out for effectively 3 weeks because they had the bye. And then he came back in the playoffs and he was just Christian McCaffrey, right? He plays 3 playoff games, 59 carries, 20 catches, just does Christian McCaffrey stuff. So I think there's 2 aspects to that where, one, it's good that he was able to come back from the calf strain and just be himself. But 2, it's bad that he had a calf strain within the past 4 games that he's played effectively. So that would be the concern, is that he's 28. He has dealt with all this soft tissue stuff before, and calf strains are the ones that tend to get re-aggravated as much as any. So I don't think it's like a 5-alarm fire yet, but certainly one to monitor, and just to make sure if you are drafting McCaffrey, that you want to take another Niners back, certainly, and not forget about that.
And it's got to be fluid, guys, because sifting through this backfield, McCaffrey's the latest injury. Guerendo's still working his way back from a hamstring. Elijah Mitchell has been missing practice. And then you brought up Matt Breida, Jay, who's thrown into the fire out of this. So, like, how do you have an answer right now, Matthew, on who is the guy when most of them, 3 out of the 4 of them, aren't even practicing right now?
I think hopefully it's Kyle Shanahan. He'll mix and match guys, but I think the one thing the McCaffrey injury does is, like, he probably wasn't going to play in the preseason that much anyway, if at all, but he now definitely isn't. And so hopefully what we can see is like, all right, well, they're gonna do at least a couple of series with the ones, right? At some point, so you can sort of see who gets work. Is it Mitchell? Is it Mason? I sort of lean towards Mason too, because I agree with Jay. Like, I know Mitchell's been effective when he's been in there, but he just can't get in there, right? You can't make the club from the tub, I believe is the old saying, and that seems to really be the case with Elijah Mitchell. I also have Jordan Mason like on 3 different dynasty teams, so I'm also like, I'm trying to will this into existence. But I think we will have more insight into this as the preseason goes on, and we sort of see what they do with their first team offense, or don't. You know what I mean? Like if they roll out a bunch of scrubs, right? If Purdy's out and Debo's out and Kittle's out and Jordan Mason's out, that sort of tells you something too, right? So we'll sort of see how that all plays out. But I think that if you were doing drafts between now and the start of the season, you're probably knocking Christian McCaffrey a little bit. But just remember, like, even if he misses 3 games, he was so much better than every other player last year. Like, he was 100 points better than every player. Like, just the upside of McCaffrey, I think, is worth it personally.
Yeah. I think, firstly, I'm glad you've renewed You Can't Make the Club from the Tub for season 2 after you debuted it very suspiciously last year. I'm not sure that is an actual saying, at least one that I've not heard. And then secondly, the thing
is it false, though?
It's an American.
Tell me I'm wrong, Jay Croucher. Jay Croucher, I'm asking you directly. Can you, in fact, make the club from the tub? You tell me.
I don't know. It makes it more difficult to make the club from the tub. That
Thank
is
you.
Without question. But speaking of, I think it's the one other thing here is that we saw the Elijah Mitchell backup experience last year, and he couldn't make the club onto the field because in games that mattered, Christian McCaffrey was playing like 100% of the snaps, which I think tells you a little bit about what Shanahan might think of Elijah Mitchell, coupled with his lukewarm comments about Mitchell this offseason. So I just think that if you want upside, and ultimately, like, that's what you want. Like, you're shooting for upside. When you're drafting, draft to win your league. You can go for the home run. I think that Jordan Mason is a bit more upside. And so he would be the guy I would lean towards.
Jordan Mason invested in a $3,000 jugs machine this offseason, guys. If we're looking for some hope from him, you love to hear it. More Niners news. The Niners news doesn't stop. NBC Bay Area's Matt Mayoko reports the 49ers have agreed to the framework of a Brandon Ayuk trade. It was originally with the Patriots and the Browns. We know Adam Schefter has updated the Patriots decided not to further explore any trade possibilities. It sounds like the Steelers maybe could be back in this, guys. The bottom line is, Matthew, this is trending towards Brandon Ayuk will not be with the 49ers, which isn't probably good news if you love Brandon Ayuk in fantasy.
It's not got good news. Let's start with the idea that Ayuk isn't on the 49ers. So, right, you up Debo a little bit, you up George Kittle a little bit. Suddenly, Juwan Jennings,
Rick Pearsall
and Ricky Pearsall. I'd actually but given how complicated Shanahan's offense is, and Pearsall's been a little banged up, I actually think Juwan Jennings, who, by the way, might have been their best player in the Super Bowl. I mean, everyone's laughing about Juwan Jennings, but seriously, like Juwan Jennings, I think that in that offense, and I mean, Juwan Jennings, I thought actually had a hell of a Super Bowl, and I think he would suddenly he's on the sleeper radar. I know Ricky Pearsall's the name and the hot rookie, but he's been banged up a little bit. And I would think that at least to start the season, Jennings would get a run ahead of Pearsall. So I think that's what happens there. And you knock Purdy down a little bit in terms of what would happen there. And certainly Brandon Ayuk going to any system that isn't San Francisco, especially the ones that are rumored, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and the Patriots, you don't love any of those situations better than the Niners. Now, I have a little bit of insight into this. A little birdie told me a couple of different things here. And so I think, and you can sort of put this together if you've seen all the different reports, and Matt Mayoko doing a great job. Other reports have been out there as well. Schefter reporting the Patriots are now out of it. But in essence, it's 2 different things. Ayuk wants to be paid. So the team that he has to basically say, yes, if you insert team decides to trade for me, I will sign a long-term extension with you. So that needs to be negotiated. But then the Niners also have to say, like, okay, well, if we're giving up this asset that we really like in Brandon Ayuk, we need a haul back. And so from what I've been able to piece together, both from my sources and from what you read online, is in essence, basically, Ayuk wanted to go to the Steelers. But the Steelers were like, the Niners, asked for whatever they asked for, and the Steelers didn't want to pay it. Meanwhile, the Niners were able to get a deal done, or the framework of a deal done, with both the Patriots and the Browns, but Ayuk didn't want to go to those teams. Mary Kay Cabot reporting this as well. Mayoka had this as well, but basically that if the Browns deal happens, and I guess that's still apparently alive, Amari Cooper would be going from Cleveland to San Francisco. And so then you sort of just see a swap there. And I actually think, Amari Cooper, I feel like honestly better quarterback play, but more competition for targets, but better quarterback play. Amari Cooper would sort of say the same. And I think you'd feel better about Ayuk in Cleveland with Deshaun Watson than you would, and Kevin Stefanski is his coach, than you would in New England or Pittsburgh with Arthur Smith calling the plays. So I think if you're an Ayuk manager, if you've already drafted and he's on your team, or you have a dynasty, I think that's what you're hoping for, because it doesn't look like he's suiting up for the Niners this season, at least as we sit here today. Pittsburgh maybe comes back, maybe they renegotiate that deal, but that's sort of where it stands. I will also say that although Ayuk's back at practice, it does not seem like none of this is good. None of this is good, right? I mean, the fact that it's sort of out there and everything like that. Patriots apparently are out of it as well, but and also apparently the Commanders, which I was hoping for, because Ayuk and Jane Daniels are very close. Obviously, Adam Peters, former San Francisco assistant general manager, has a lot of ties to John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. They've made trades before a couple of different times where we've gotten fleeced on Trent Williams and Chase Young. So I was hoping that Ayuk would show up in a Commander's uniform, but that apparently is also off the table.
Yeah, I think the thing with Ayuk is that it's interesting, just the push and pull between his efficiency is clearly going to go down if he leaves Brock Purdy and the Shanahan system and all the other weapons that the Niners have to take attention away from Ayuk. But his volume will go up basically anywhere he goes. Last year, Brandon Ayuk was 36th in the NFL in targets. He had one more target all of last season than Elijah Moore. He had 7 more targets than Tyler Boyd. Meanwhile, he was 7th in the NFL in receiving yards at over 1,300. So again, if he goes to the Browns, that to me is the most compelling situation, because all of a sudden that offense becomes just the weirdest, most high variance offense in the entire NFL. You have Nick Chubb coming back at some point. You have Deshaun Watson, who we still have no idea if he's any good or not. And we have a new offensive coordinator in Ken Dorsey, who allegedly is going to play more shotgun, increase the pace. Deshaun allegedly looks good at camp. So there are all these competing factors, but I think it's probably a net positive if Ayuk gets traded there, just because of the volume and the upside, where now there are worlds where he could be, the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy. That's on the table, and it's probably not on the table in San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, Amari Cooper averaged over 8 targets a game last year, had 128 total there. And so, Connor, our guy Cedric Tillman having a nice camp as well, and whatever. And they've got some other guys there. I know they've always been trying to get Elijah Moore going as well. You've got Nick Chubb, but I agree with you. Like I think that's the best case scenario. Pittsburgh feels like it's gonna be run heavy. I guess the argument there would be if it doesn't seem like Pickens would be the guy that would it doesn't seem like Pickens would be the guy that would go back to San Francisco if the Steelers trade happens. So I guess what you're hoping there is volume. And again, to your point, he doesn't need a ton of volume to be productive. I like this stat as well. Last year, only Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb had more receptions of 20 or more yards than Brandon Ayuk. And as you mentioned, he just didn't get a lot of looks. It was a run-heavy offense. There were a lot of mouths to feed in San Francisco. So, when he got looks, he was very productive. Incredibly talented player. Tough contract situation right now in San Francisco. We'll see how it all plays out.
Our last bit of news here, guys, sticking with the wide receivers. Pro Football Talks Mike Florio believes Jordan Addison will eventually face a 3-game suspension for his July DUI arrest. Addison's hearing has been set for October 7th. So, Jay, I mean, we've seen these things really, really drag out over the years in terms of when the league gets involved and actually enforcing any kind of suspension. Obviously, Florio's hinting at it'll be a 3-game suspension, but it's kind of a wild card if that suspension is going to impact this year or a following year.
Absolutely. I mean, this could get dragged out for a long time. There's no real clarity around that. Obviously, you have to downgrade Addison somewhat just for the possibility that he could be missing time this season. But I mean, there's no one who is, to me, super attractive in the Vikings wide receiver depth chart. There's also just the added uncertainty of TJ Hawkinson, when he's going to come back, what he's going to look like. To me, all this points to is that I think that people are, and it's weird to call this guy underrated, but I think people are sleeping a little bit on Justin Jefferson.
I agree.
And just the insane amount of targets he's going to gobble up. And I think that he's going to get more competent quarterback play than he did towards the end of last season when it was the Nick Mullins, Jaron Hall show. Jefferson didn't get really to play much with Josh Dobbs at all. So I think that Jefferson, if I was taking wide receiver one, I guess like CD Lamb might have the highest floor just because he has Dak and he plays in a dome. But I think Jefferson, it's very much on the table that he repeats being wide receiver one that he was a couple of years ago. But Connor, I'm just interested in terms of like the depth on this team at receiver. Do you think that Sam Darnold, who looks like is probably going to be the starter, do you think he is salvageable where he can turn some of these second-tier receivers into guys?
In Kevin O'Connell's offense, it obviously sets a higher floor for Sam, but I lean more with you that this is just going to be Justin Jefferson's show all the way. And the fact is, for me, assuming he's healthy, I think they're going to throw the ball a lot to Aaron Jones as well. I don't really look at the wide receiver room and get excited over the depth of that when Hawkinson's been ahead of his rehab timeline. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because it was a late injury, but he's been ahead of schedule. They bring in Aaron Jones because, quite frankly, besides the outside zone running game that O'Connell loves to run and Jones fits that, they could throw him the ball as well. So, Jay, I think it's just funneled differently where it's an uptick for Jefferson. It's more on the plate for Aaron Jones. And when Hawkinson's ready, we know he's the guy, the number 2 guy in the offense. What do you think, Matthew?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the NFL, we saw this with the Alvin Kamara case as well. The NFL is reluctant to hand down any sort of suspension until the legal process plays out. So you're mentioning the court case isn't until October. So there's a chance that gets delayed, that that lawyers file, motions to, all sorts of motions that it gets delayed and pushed and everything like that. And then regardless of how that court case plays out, is there an appeal process, etc. So there's a chance that there is not a decision in his legal case until the season is over or until close to the season is over, at which point the NFL may say, you know what, we're just going to wait until the offseason. They are generally reluctant to hand out suspensions, right? And so I think there's a better than average chance that Jordan Addison doesn't miss any games this year due to suspension. Eventually he will, but so I don't know. If I'm in best ball and like you're thinking about the playoffs and maybe he's not there at the end of the season, okay, fine. But sort of feels like if you're in redraft leagues and you're wanting to take a flyer on somebody in the Vikings offense, because Addison did have some real nice moments last year. And obviously there's going to be less target competition this season, worse quarterback play, but we expect, whether it's Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy, we expect Kevin O'Connell to get that offense going. It's still going to be a pass first offense. I don't mind Jordan Addison. I actually think this might, sleeper is strong, but I do think this might make him a little bit of a value because people may devalue him because of this news. And I'm sort of like, I guess for me, it wouldn't affect how I draft Jordan Addison this year in redraft leagues.
Yeah, it's a classic case of that little note card or red flag in your draft, and people just kind of wave their arms and say no when it could be a minor situation for him on the field.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest RotoWorld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.